beauties, I hope you're doing fabulous. Today I'm going to show you all my dupe of Nomad's Stargazer New Zealand palette. I am going to go row by row on the original palette from top row all the way to bottom row and tell you what dupe I picked for the color that's in the palette and why I picked that dupe, and I'm going to swatch the dupe for you. I don't have the original palette, so I can't compare or anything because it doesn't make any sense if I feel like I can dupe the palette to also buy the original palette. The purpose of these dupings is to not have to pay additional for makeup that I can dupe. I also want to encourage you all with these kinds of videos to buy less makeup if you can dupe the palettes that you like. If that sounds good to you, let's get into the video. That I'm duping is Dark Sky Nation, and you all know that I don't like matte blacks, so I picked two possible options for this color. One is this beautiful color Multiverse from Terra Moons. I expect this color to be flaky, so I already primed my hand with BH Cosmetics Base Booster. I don't know if this is multichrome, actually, to be honest. I don't know if I can call this multichrome, but this is such a beautiful shimmer. And I think it's ideal as a dupe if you don't like black mattes like me or don't use them as often, which is my case. Another option for the same color, I picked this one. This is Narwhal from Cliona. Now, I don't know if this is available because Cliona doesn't really have all of their circle pans available, which is part of the reason why I was like, well, if I recommend a shade that's not available anymore, it kind of is unfair. But this is such a beautiful, beautiful gunmetal type of a shade that has a tiny hint of blue, and I think it really goes well with the other colors in this palette. I have already done an eye look with this palette, and one of my to buy or not to buys is linked in the description box below if you're interested. If you really, really, really want me to do looks, I'm traveling when this video goes up. Maybe I can do more looks when I'm back. For the next shade in this palette, Carter Observatory, I have seen images that show different shades here. Some look like very dark blue, some look like purple. For this one, I picked a dark toned cool purple. This is Royal from Terra Moons, which is such a nice shade. I really like Terra Moons mattes. They are very buttery and pigmented. Carina Nebula is our next shade, which looks like a beautiful metallic pink to gold, and for this one I chose Centennial Wheel from Copacetic. This one is also perhaps better used on a tacky base. So this one has a very bright magenta pink shift all the way, transitioning to pink all the way to gold. This is such a beautiful, beautiful shade. One of those favorites from Copacetic. Our next color is Auckland Stardome, which is a magenta matte shade. For this one, I picked a ColourPop shade Sandbar. This is one of those beautiful Barbie pink colors and super pigmented. One issue with these ColourPop shades is that some of them do stain. Our next shade in the palette, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this correctly, is Aaki McKenzie, which is a dark purple matte, but with more red in it. The other purple matte that we had more blue in it. And for this one, I picked Moon Reverie from Terra Moons. Now this shade from Terra Moons is kind of kick-up-y, but beautiful and super, super pigmented, as you can see. So we're done with the top row. And now the first shade On the left-hand side of the middle row is a dark blue. For this one, I actually thought about picking something that's not as deep because overall, I feel like this palette has a lot of very dark shades. Both dark purples that we saw, even if one of them was a dark blue, were pretty dark. And then we're gonna see some other dark shades, which is why I decided to pick a medium toned blue for this one. And this one is Fine China Matte from ColourPop. I figured this color together with some of the purples that we saw, even with the pink, magenta pink that we saw, would give some beautiful, beautiful outcomes. You can get very adventurous with this color because, as I said, you can make looks that are not as deep as if you had picked a shade that was an exact dupe for the color that's in the palette. The next shade in the palette is Milky Way, and beauties, I don't exactly know if this shade is a multichrome or not, but for this one I decided to pick a teal to purple multichrome. This one is Vibrations from the Jewel Dreams collection from Shine by SD. As you know, all of the different brands that do these kinds of multichromes have a dupe for this, so you don't have to pick this one. You can pick whichever you like. In fact, I have even talked about some multichromes that released from LA Girl. I mean, I think they released them as duochromes, which is also fine, but some of the ones that they released, what were they called? They were called, I think, shade shifters. You can even use some of those colors. These are what I'm talking about, and you can buy these from Ulta or any other drugstore kind of a place. And as you can see, Vibrations has a very obvious teal. In fact, from some angles, I even see kind of a grass green going all the way into dark purple. This kind of has a black base. You can call this a black base. And frankly, from some angles, I even see a hint of magenta shift. The next shade in the palette is called the Cosmos, and it's a medium tone to possibly dark tone gray. For this one, I actually chose to pick a very light tone gray, again, for the same reason. I feel like my main complaint about all the palettes that I review is that they don't have enough light tones, which is why I'm trying to balance some of the dark tones in this palette with making some of the tones of the shades that they have lighter. The shade that I picked is Concrete Road from Sydney Grace. One thing I've seen from a lot of gray colors is that what you see in the pan is actually usually lighter than what it's going to look like on your skin. And now this isn't foolproof. Sometimes that's not the case, but that makes me actually think that if you're looking at the Nomad palette, that shade on your skin is probably going to be darker than what you see in the pan, which is why I was like, I'm going to balance it out with using a lighter tone color. In fact, this color is great if you want to make sort of a neutral sort of a look, or even a smoky kind of a look with this palette if you don't want to be super colorful. I make sort of a neutrally look in the video in the To Buy or Not to Buy where I use this palette. Again, that video is tagged in the description box below, and you can check it out if you want. Friends, at this point, we're more than halfway done. The next shade in the palette is sort of a gold that has a, I think, shift of pink. Now, what is in the palette looks very goldy, and because I wanted to make my dupe palette have more variety and diversity and be able to make a sort of funky looks with, I chose no other from Shine by SD in my version of the palette. And this is a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous gold shade that has a shift of pink. Now, I think this gold shade is lighter than the gold that is in the original palette, and I think the pink shift of it is perhaps a little bit more subtle. Again, I don't really have the palette, so I can't really say for sure, but this is a gorgeous shade, and I wanted to use it, because it's gorgeous and I kind of want to make looks with it. And I thought it would be a great option for Jewel Box, the shade that is in the palette. I also use this one in the look that I make in my To Buy or Not to Buy. So you can see how I made a partially neutral, partially colorful look with it. The next shade in the palette is Southern Lights, which is a standard pink. For this one, again, I chose to go a shade lighter than what showed up in some of the photos of the palette. Again, obviously a lot of these photos are also enhanced, so it's kind of difficult to know what the color exactly is. This is Flower Boy by ColourPop, but this kind of color is great for me in this kind of a palette because, first of all, as I mentioned, a lot of times these colors in the pan look lighter than they actually swatch on your hand. And also this exact color would look amazing with some of the purples that I already showed you, the matte purples, as well as in fact the gray that I just showed you, as well as that Barbie pink, as well as a lot of our shimmers. We now have one more row to go. The first shade in the third row, Southern Cross, looks like one of the most commonly seen multichromes, which is a gold shift all the way to a magenta shift. And for this one, I also picked a color from Shine by SD's Jewel Dreams. This one is Distraction. Again, as I mentioned, this is one of the most commonly seen multichrome shifts. So if you don't have this exact dupe, you can pick any dupe you have. And in fact, I do have the dupe in LA Girl. This one is Sunset, so you can use this one. Now this one might not be as shifty or as extreme as the one from Shine by SD, but honestly, it's a very, very close dupe. If you've watched this video up to here, beauties, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps this channel be recommended to other people who might find these kinds of videos interesting. So as you can see, there is a green shift even at some angles, going into gold, going into bronze, copper, and then all the way into very extreme magenta purple. This is such a beautiful shade. I might be butchering the next shade's name. I think it's called Tongariro Night Hike. And for this one, I picked Dried Heather from Glam Shop, which is a very dark mauve or sort of a dusty rose kind of a color. I love this shade, and this goes amazing with the gray that I showed you all earlier. It was difficult to see whether the color in the palette is just a neutral light brown or whether it's more this kind of a color, but I liked this kind of a color because I think it goes really, really well with a lot of the other things that I swatch, like the purples, like the pinks, because it does have that mauvey pinky undertone. And this color is very nice. You can build it up. I think my hand is a little bit wet because I keep wiping it off to show you the color, but it can possibly build up to look like that. Okay, friends, we have a few more to go. Our next color is Aurora Australis. I think this is a multichrome, which is exactly why I picked a multichrome color to represent it. And the multichrome that I choose is Florage from Nomad Cosmetics, which is a beautiful, beautiful pink shift iridescent multichrome. So I don't want to keep saying that I don't have the palette, but I've seen a lot of the swatches and of course also the pan in photos. And this shade looks like it's a very close dupe for that shade, if not exactly that shade. So you can see the magenta shift going into a bronze coppery shift all the way to kind of a goldy shift, but mostly just bronze and magenta. This is a beautiful, beautiful iridescent multichrome from Copacetic, and of course, as it happens all the time, right before this video I had to dig a finger in it and kind of damage it, and I'm upset about that. Friends, our next shade is Queenstown Skyline, which in some photos it looks like it's just a cream color. In some photos it looks like a dark orangey kind of a color. similar to what I did with some of these other colors, I chose to pick a relatively light tone color because I wanted to pick something that goes with the type of looks I like to make. This is Lay Low from ColourPop, which is a very beautiful light coral type of a shade. And in fact, it's not as light on the skin. You can build it up. It's darker than what it shows in the pan. It's a beautiful shade. And our last but not least shade in the palette is Melanic Clouds. And in some photos of the palette, this shade looks like a gold, like a very light iridescent goldy color. And in some other photos, it looks more pink. For this shade, I chose to pick this one, Andromeda from Nomad Cosmetics. Now, beauties, I am a little bit unsure about the difference in the palette, the actual palette itself, not in my dupe, between the two colors, Magellanic Sky and Aurora Australis, but you could possibly use this as a dupe for Aurora Australis, and Florage that I picked for Aurora Australis as a dupe for Melanic Clouds. Honestly, it doesn't matter. But this shade is essentially Aurora Australis, but made in pastel form. I mean, all the shifts of that color are more diffused, like significantly more diffused. So you still have pink, magenta kind of shifts, but much more diffused. You have the bronze, goldy shift. They're all much, much more diffused. Okay, beauties, that brings us to the end of this video. If you enjoyed this video and you watched it this far and you're not subscribed to my channel, go ahead and subscribe. Also, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. I have a lot of videos like this where I swatch different kind of singles, I dupe popular palettes from different indie brands, and I even make my own custom-made palettes. And I have a lot of playlists for them, and one of those playlists is going to be recommended to you on the screen. Have an amazing day, and until next time, bye!